The moment when reality finally pressed back against expectation did not announce itself with alarms or dramatic groundings. It arrived slowly, almost politely, through the daily rhythm of aviation operations where ambition is tested not by speeches or prototypes but by repetition. At first, everything appeared to be unfolding according to plan. The aircraft took to the air as intended, its silhouette cutting a confident shape against the sky, carrying with it the weight of a promise that it would redefine how large aircraft were conceived and used. Engineers watched early flights with guarded optimism, pilots reported smooth handling within expected parameters, and executives pointed to performance charts that still aligned closely enough with projections to justify continued confidence. But aviation has a way of exposing truths that cannot be hidden behind averages. Each flight added another layer of data, and slowly those layers began to reveal patterns that were uncomfortable rather than catastrophic. The aircraft did not fail to fly. It did not fall short in obvious, dramatic ways. Instead, it asked difficult questions every time it was operated outside carefully controlled conditions. Weather variations introduced complexities that required constant attention. Temperature changes altered performance margins. Runway lengths, airport infrastructure, and air traffic constraints all interacted with the aircraft in ways that demanded adjustments rather than seamless integration. None of these issues alone were deal breakers, but together they formed a friction that grew harder to ignore. What had once been described as a direct replacement now began to feel conditional. The aircraft could match or exceed expectations in certain scenarios, but only when the environment cooperated. In real-world operations, environments rarely do. Airlines discovered that schedules had to be built around the aircraft rather than the aircraft fitting into existing schedules. Routes that looked ideal on planning maps revealed inefficiencies when flown repeatedly. Fuel calculations varied. More than expected, not enough to ground the aircraft, but enough to complicate long-term forecasting. The promise of simplicity quietly gave way to a reality of management. Pilots were among the first to sense that something was shifting. From the cockpit, the aircraft felt advanced, responsive, and in many ways impressive. Yet it demanded a level of attention that differed from the established giants it was meant to replace. Those older aircraft carried with them decades of institutional knowledge. Crews knew how they behaved when pushed, how they reacted to imperfect conditions, and how to anticipate their quirks. This newer machine had not yet earned that trust. Procedures were precise, tolerances narrower, and deviations less forgiving. Flying it was not harder, but it was less intuitive, and intuition matters in an industry where judgment is often shaped by experience. On the ground, maintenance crews began to encounter similar realities. The aircraft systems reflected modern thinking, but modernity did not automatically translate into ease. Components were sophisticated, integrated, and efficient by design. Yet that same integration meant that minor issues could ripple outward. Tasks that were routine on older aircraft sometimes required additional steps, specialized tools, or manufacturer guidance. Turnaround times crept upward, not because of major faults, but because efficiency assumed a level of consistency that everyday operations rarely provided. Each extra hour on the ground represented not just time lost, but confidence eroded. Operational planners watched closely as these small discrepancies accumulated. Airlines operate on thin margins, and their success depends on predictability. A fleet works when it behaves the same way day after day, week after week. The aircraft's performance envelope was impressive, but its consistency varied just enough to complicate planning. Some days it exceeded expectations, reinforcing belief in its potential. Other days it required adjustments that reverberated through schedules, crew assignments, and maintenance rotations. The variability was manageable, but management itself carries a cost. As months turned into years, the contrast between promise and practice became clearer. The large aircraft already in service were not perfect, but they were known quantities. Their inefficiencies had been absorbed into business models, their limitations balanced by reliability. They did not demand that. The industry changed for them. They fit into systems that had grown around them. The new aircraft, by contrast, asked for adaptation. It was not unreasonable in its demands, but it was persistent. Training programs expanded. Documentation thickened. Support networks had to be reinforced. The question was no longer whether the aircraft could perform, but whether its performance justified the disruption it introduced. Financial analysis sharpened this question. Early projections had assumed that technological advancement would naturally reduce costs over time. Instead, accountants began to see a more complex picture. Specialized training, tailored maintenance, and operational adjustments offset gains that had once seemed straightforward. The aircraft did not break budgets overnight, but it challenged assumptions quietly, line by line, spreadsheet by spreadsheet. In boardrooms, enthusiasm softened into caution. The narrative surrounding the aircraft began to change subtly. At first, marketing language shifted from inevitability to capability. Where it had once been described as the future, it was now framed as an option. Press releases emphasized strengths rather than supremacy. Internally, deployment strategies were revised to place the aircraft where it performed best rather than everywhere it was originally envisioned. This narrowing of role was not a failure in the traditional sense, but it marked a clear departure from the idea of replacement. Engineers continued refining systems, addressing issues as they arose, confident that improvements would compound. Over time, yet aviation history offered a sobering counterpoint. Incremental improvements favor platforms that are already widely adopted. For an aircraft still proving itself, every refinement arrived under scrutiny. Each upgrade required justification, certification, and retraining. The giants it was meant to replace also evolved, quietly incorporating enhancements that extended their relevance. The race was no longer between old and new, but between stability and disruption. From the outside, the aircraft still looked like progress. It remained advanced, capable, and impressive to observers. But within the industry, perception had shifted. Replacement implies inevitability, a sense that change will happen whether one resists it or not. That sense faded. Decision-makers began speaking of balance rather than transition. Fleets diversified instead of transforming. The aircraft found its place, but not the place it was promised. The realization did not arrive as disappointment so much as acceptance. The aircraft had been designed with vision, backed by expertise and supported by data. Yet data could not fully account for the lived reality of global operations. In that environment, bold ideas must do more than excel, they must endure. Over time, the aircraft's story settled into a quieter truth. It had not been wrong, but it had not been right enough. It demonstrated what was possible, but possibility alone could not displace experience. The giants continued flying not because they were flawless, but because they were dependable. The industry did not reject innovation. It simply measured it against reality and chose caution. In the end, the challenge to expectations was not a single obstacle but a gradual accumulation of lessons. Each flight added clarity. Each maintenance report refined understanding. Each financial review narrowed ambition. The aircraft remained a testament to ingenuity, but its role was reshaped by the world it entered. Replacement gave way to coexistence. And coexistence slowly edged toward obscurity. What lingered was not bitterness, but a quiet respect for the complexity of aviation. The aircraft had forced the industry to ask hard questions about progress, risk, and practicality. It had shown that being advanced is not the same as being indispensable. And as attention shifted elsewhere, the aircraft's story began to fade, not because it lacked merit, but because reality had gently, persistently, and decisively reminded everyone that the sky rewards those who balance ambition with endurance.